We want to turn the page here. We wanted to check in, if you will, Rania, on the Ukrainian counter offensive that's allegedly going on now. As you may or may not have heard, it doesn't seem to be going all that great. It seems to be pretty stalled. But all you see in the U.S. media is basically just that it's happening, that Ukraine's doing like basically okay, even though it's not going as well as they wanted, and that somehow, some way, even though it's basically going okay, they need more money and more weapons. I believe there's a new $300 million package being discussed, I think, in the United States. Spain, big spenders, sending 4 tanks to Ukraine. I mean, that's
It's gonna be a game changer.
I just thought, like, wow, like, are you? What's the point of even doing it at this point? But anyway, and obviously, you know, a number of ongoing issues in terms of where the war is going to go, when is it going to end, is there going to be peace? I mean, obviously, we're in a global cost of living crisis that's being caused by the war. So anyway, we just wanted to try to give people a sense of what's really going on vis-a-vis this Ukrainian counteroffensive. So I want to start by showing like a big map, Rania, of like the whole Ukraine and the area that is, you know, well, controlled by Russia, part of Russia in some countenances or whatever. And this map that we want to bring up here is from not a Breakthrough News Source, it's the Institute for Study of War. So like pro-Ukraine, you know, so I'm not pulling from some Russian propaganda.
Robert Kagan propaganda.
Couldn't be more neocon than this. So you see those areas in red that are shaded there? Those are the areas that are, well, again, depending on who you ask, either controlled by Russia, part of Russia now because of the votes that took place, the broad part of eastern Ukraine. But what I think is notable, Rania, about this map is that despite all of this Ukrainian counteroffensive, Ukraine's doing great, this map has basically looked exactly the same for like 6 straight months, maybe even longer than that. I mean, it's basically like there's been almost no change in the front line since the middle of 2022. And somehow the narrative in the U.S. media is somehow that the war is winnable, that Ukraine is doing well, that the money that's being put in is a good, you know, amount of money. But yet and still, again, you look at that red there, that's the area where Russia is in control, has not really, and if you're wondering, that little bit of blue is allegedly where there's partisan activity for the Ukrainians. But basically it has not changed at all for almost the entirety of the past, I don't know, 6 to 9 months. I didn't go back to check. But that's what I always think about. ISW puts these out every single day, basically. And we'll see some more of the maps they have to give you a more of a sense of what's going on. But every single day, basically, it never changes. But the spin on their tweets is always basically like, things are going really great for Ukraine and really bad for Russia.
It's funny because, you know, before we started recording, as I was looking at just like looking through, perusing like what the media is saying about this particular topic, the Western press, I just think it's worth reading a couple headlines.
Please.
Because it really shows. Okay, so one is Ukraine counteroffensive will be long and bloody, says U.S. General Mark Milley. Okay. Long and bloody. I mean, it's been over a year. Like that. Okay. Yes, that is correct. It's going to be long and bloody. That's then, you know, Ukraine war, the lethal minefields holding up Kiev's counteroffensive. So like that's blaming the fact that Russia has massive minefields. That's making it harder for Ukraine to win. That's the BBC, the Washington Post. This is my favorite. Ukraine's top general wants shells, planes, and patience. So it's just like you read these headlines and it's clear that there's it's like there's not even trying anymore. They're just like, yeah, it's going to be long and bloody and Ukrainians are going to continue to die. Looking at this map, it's unwinnable. Like it's unwinnable. It's unsustainable. Here's another one. Reuters, Ukraine right to be cautious with counteroffensive, top NATO official says. It's just like you can sense the fact that like they're all very well aware. It's either Ukraine begging for more weapons, some Western country saying we're going to give them more weapons, or like some media outlet headline that's justifying why nothing has changed and why it's just going to continue to be bloody and horrible. Because that's just the way it is and it has to be. So like at this point, it's like, okay, if nothing's changing, the only thing that's changing is that more Ukrainians and Russians are dying. Like, what is the point of a war where nobody's ever going to win?
No,
Like,
that's a good point.
other than, I mean, we understand that that's what the US wants, right? They want to like bleed Russia to the last Ukrainian, but like Russia's still standing. I mean, they survived an apparent rebellion. I'm just joking. I'm not going to call it
Yeah.
that. But no, like it's like Russia's still standing. It's still for now it's economically prospering. The world is becoming more multipolar. There's an increasingly there's this rise of this economic bloc that's outside of US control as a result of US policy in many ways. And meanwhile, it's like, what is NATO getting out of it, and what is the US getting out of it? I actually don't quite see it. And certainly Europe isn't getting anything out of it. Europe is actually like becoming weaker as a result of all this.
Yeah. Significantly weaker, and it's going to go long and bloody, as you said. General Mark Milley, I think, is about to actually step down from the U.S. military, and I mean, obviously, you never really get much of a sense of what exactly is happening. There's a Washington Post article recently that was embedded in, or I don't know if they were embedded, but they were interviewing people from a Ukrainian unit that's a part of this offensive, which, by the way, has been going on since about mid-June. I think we have a screenshot that has a little paragraph from that. But the thing I really want to read to you, I don't know how big it is on people's screen, but it's the last paragraph, and it's talking about when they were out fighting. It says, "There were fewer than 50 men in the unit," he said, "and 30 did not return. They were killed, wounded, or captured by the enemy. 5 of the unit's armored vehicles were destroyed within the first hour." 50 men, 30 did not return. That's in one offensive. And the first half is about how he said, "We were left there in the field without tanks or heavy armor. We were shelled with mortars from 3 sides. We couldn't do anything." So I don't know the percentages there, but out of 50, 30 did not return, the vast majority. And so this is when you're hearing that it's stalled, that it's bloody, that it's this. I mean, these Ukrainian units who allegedly, according to the mainstream media, 9 times out of 10, these things are buried deep in the article, are like doing well when they're being decimated. And there's just real quick another Washington Post screenshot that I think speaks to this and how badly it's going here. If we have that and can pull it up, it's from Graham Allison, who's an opinion columnist there, who was, doing some calculations about how long it would take Ukraine to take back all of the territory it's lost based on how they're going now. And he says, and again, this is a pro-Ukrainian columnist who's talking about how Ukraine needs to win. It's all good. But he says, to put the matter into perspective, today, Russia controls about 17% of the territory that was previously Ukraine's. If Ukrainian forces are no more successful in the weeks ahead than they have been so far, Ukraine will not recapture all of its territory for 16 years. That's how it's going in the counteroffensive.
Wow. Okay, so can I just counter what you just said?
Please.
With something that was recently said by Ukraine's top general.
Ready.
Which is that they just need shells, planes, and patience. I don't know why you can't understand. No, I mean, so all jokes aside, I mean, yeah, that's 30 of 50 people. So you have that's what kind of percentage of a survival rate is that? I can't do fast math.
I can't either, but it's high.
Not good. It is not good. That is a high rate of failure and death. And that sounds pretty horrendous. And at some point, you're just killing off by continuing this war. You're making sure that a significant portion of Ukraine's male population is going to just die.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
well, I think another point on that I want to note that came out today, and we want to bring up a couple things from the New York Times here, is the U.S. is now saying they're going to provide cluster munitions to Ukraine. Cluster munitions that are banned by about 120 nations. Really unbelievable here. I guess it's still to some degree expected, not 100% confirmed. I mean, of course, the United States, nor Russia for that matter, if you want to talk about it, ban cluster munitions. But there's even the countries have not banned them. People are so about using them because they are, so dangerous. I mean, it's a complicated thing, but basically what you have with cluster munitions are little bomblets. I actually think we have a screenshot explaining from the New York Times in this article why they're so bad. But it's basically you think of a big bomb, but one that sort of essentially breaks into a lot of little bombs, and then they go over a wide area. And so, and they also have a really high failure rate too. So sometimes they like don't really explode, and then they cause many problems later on because they're there in the ground for some times. But basically, cluster munitions are known for having a huge impact on civilians, and that's what this is here. Why are they so controversial? And by the way, the part just under this part of the article is, aren't these things illegal? But yeah, it's like they're bomblets designed to explode or ignite upon hitting the ground. Historically, the failure rate is the highest among classes of weapons with lasting and often devastating consequences for civilians. According to humanitarian groups, a fifth or more of bomblets can linger, potentially to detonate when disturbed or handled years later. So the way they fall over this broad area hurts a lot of civilians. A lot of them don't work, which means that, kids, that's really who's picking a lot of these things up, will pick them up 10 years from now and blow their hands off. It's really one of the sort of worst weapons. So like I said, I think it's 120 countries that have banned cluster munitions. But again, even the countries that have not banned them usually are relatively do not use them usually 9 times out of 10. Sometimes they do because they know that the backlash around using cluster munitions is pretty bad given it. But now, despite everything that's happening, the U.S. is giving them to Ukraine.
Well, it depends which country you are, of course, because, I'm talking to you from a country, Lebanon, that in 2006, just before like the ceasefire went into effect, after the Israelis invaded and then failed in southern Lebanon, the Israelis dropped 4 million cluster munitions across southern Lebanon, and until years and years after, as soon as recently, every once in a while, like a kid, because they look like toys, they're very, very small. It looks like a toy, and a kid will be playing in like a field, and he'll pick it up and, like you said, blow their hands off. And then there's all these like NGOs that work to clear those kinds of munitions, which is useful and helpful, but it would be better if they just weren't used in the first place.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't cause problems years later.
Really unbelievable that's where we are. But that's where we're at, is the Ukraine counteroffensive basically stalled, units being mauled and decimated, armored vehicles being destroyed, very little progress being made. And rather than move towards peace, the U.S. is saying we're going to give you even more destructive weapons so you can not win, but create the maximum level of damage and devastation against Russia, which is all they care about, not the lives of Ukrainians. I'll also note here, Newsweek has a very interesting article that came out, I think yesterday, maybe earlier today, Bill Arkin, about the role of the CIA in Ukraine and how they're all in Ukraine. They're inside of the country. They're working. They're helping on a number of different fronts. So America directly involved in the conflict. It's a very, very interesting piece. That's a piece of it right there, a screenshot we have there. I'll read it to you. It says, the CIA has been operating inside of Ukraine under strict rules and with a cap on how many personnel can be in the country at any time. Black special operators are restricted from conducting clandestine missions, and when they do, it is within a very narrow scope. So I don't know how you're restricted, but then you can do it anyway. You're there under strict rules, but it also says in the article how the CIA can do things the military can't, because military personnel are basically restricted from being in the country because they're trying to say the U.S. isn't involved. It's a very interesting article from Bill Arkin. It's a long article in Newsweek, but basically how the CIA is playing a massive role orchestrating this war, quite frankly, is the way he lays it out. The logistics networks, helping them with the training, convincing other countries to get more involved, actually trying to convince some other countries not to do too much. All these different pieces, this shadow game that's going on here. It's really quite something, I have to say. So
that's direct U.S. involvement. Like, it's a U.S. war. I mean, that's like, is that even a proxy war anymore? If you're just like talking about how openly, wow, that's dangerous. But we knew this is where we were because this has been going on. But I do love those contradictions.
Yes.
On the one, and also, you guys can rest easy knowing there are restrictions, and they are both involved and not involved at the same time.
Yes. Wild thing.